Matt, on the NSM report, can we get the latest ETA on when state will submit that?
In the coming days.
So-
It's the very near future. I don't have a date to affix on the calendar for you, but it will be very soon, I can assure you.
Is there a chance it might slip into early next week?
I am not going to give any timetable at all other than to say the coming days, which is what I said yesterday. I can assure you it will not be long.
A couple of other things. In your answer to Matt, you said the report is going to be retrospective.
Correct.
Right.
It's looking at past conduct.
Right. And he asked you, I think if I got it right, whether there is going to be any practical impact on president's comments on the report.
Correct.
But the president's comments last night also covered the past. He talked about, let me find the quote here, he talked about civilians have been killed in Gaza as a consequence of those bombs. Can you explain to us how his comments have no practical impact on the report?
What I was taking Matt's question to mean is Matt's question was related to the decision that the president announced last night, or that the president made public, to not provide Israel certain military weapons for a Rafah campaign. That is a forward-looking decision. We have paused shipments now. The report is a backwards-looking thing. Now, the report will obviously look at allegations of violations of international humanitarian law. That's a different thing than what the president. I mean, I'm speaking just to a determination going forward versus a backwards-looking report.
Well, let me ask it in the way that I sort of was thinking about asking. It is a report that is assessing whether or not Israel's assurances are credible on two things, and one of them is using U.S. supplied weapons in accordance with international humanitarian law. And the President of the United States yesterday said civilians have been killed in Gaza as a consequence of those bombs, in reference to the 2,000-pound bombs. So can you explain again, like, how his comments, maybe that's not a determination as a result of a legal process, but those are comments from President of the United States. How does that not have any impact on the findings of the report?
So I think you have to look at two separate things. One is the tragic loss of civilian life throughout this conflict, which we have spoken to many times. The president's spoken to, the secretary has spoken to, other members of the administration have spoken to. And we have said that far too many people have died, that Israel needs to do more to minimize civilian harm, that the actions they have taken have not yielded sufficient results. All of those things we believe to be true, still believe to be true. That is different than a legal question of whether there have been violations of international humanitarian law. That's a different question. It goes to not just questions of civilian life, loss of civilian life, but whether international humanitarian law was violated in the loss of that life. And those questions are something that we continue to look at and have not reached any determinations.
And how do you determine whether international humanitarian law is violated with those killings? Is your criteria intent?
So there are all sorts of things when you look at I'm obviously not a lawyer, but when you look at the standards that have been applied in every conflict around the world, it goes to questions of intent, it goes to questions of proportionality. There are other things you have to look at when making those determinations.
My final thing on this. How do you think, I'm just trying to wrap my head around this. In his comments, President has also said in the other part of the sentence, and in other ways in which they go after population centers. Going after someone or something does imply to me intent. And also the bombs in question are 2,000-pound bombs, and their impact when dropped in a population center are known. We know that Gaza is already it's very densely populated, and there are people squeezed in a small place. So how can any country claim there was no intent if you're dropping a 2,000 bomb on a population center?
So this goes back to the very difficult problem that Israel has faced from the beginning, is that you have Hamas embedded in these population centers. So yes, the Israeli military very clearly is operating within population centers because that's where Hamas was. That's where their military targets have been. And I will say, as we have looked at this conflict from the beginning, obviously we react to facts on the ground. So at the outset of this conflict, you saw Hamas that was well entrenched in civilian areas and was able to launch not just the attacks of October 7th, but dozens and dozens of rocket attacks for a while. They were launching them every day for the first month of this conflict. And Israel in the first stages able to degrade Hamas's ability to the fact that those attacks, while they still happen, are sporadic. They're not as frequent. And the Hamas battalions in northern Gaza and central Gaza have largely been defeated and have been dismantled, though clearly there is still a Hamas population that exists in all of those areas. What we have also seen over the course of this conflict is Israel take measures to try and reduce civilian harm, and we have seen the numbers come down. Just if you look at the death toll from back in October, November, as Israel implemented additional measures, the civilian death toll did go down, but we haven't seen it come down far enough. And so when you take all those facts and you overlay them with a campaign in Rafah where you have a denser civilian population than Israel would have faced anywhere else, just because of the people that have fled there. And you look at their track record, previous points in the operation, it leads us to believe that there would be incredible civilian toll, and it's something that we can't support.
Okay, truly final one, and I apologize to my colleagues. Can you tell us where we are on the hostage talks? And there are Israeli officials, I believe perhaps Prime Minister Netanyahu, saying a deal on the hostage talks collapsed because of President's decision and because President signaled this decision. What would you say to that?
So first of all, I'm not going to respond to anonymous officials. Is that on the record quote from someone? I'm not going to respond to anonymous officials, but I would just say that is not at all our assessment of hostage talks. We actually think that a Rafah operation would weaken Israel's position both in these talks and writ large. We've talked about this before, that a major military operation in Rafah would further weaken Israel's standing in the world, would further create distance from its partners in the region who actually share Israel's goal of seeing Hamas defeated and want to see Hamas replaced with a different governance structure in Gaza. And then also, if you look at Hamas's track record, they have never cared about Palestinian civilian lives. If they did, they wouldn't have launched these attacks in the first place, which they knew would produce a response. They wouldn't hide behind civilians, and they would have agreed to a ceasefire long ago. So I just don't think that argument holds any water. With respect to the talks itself, so we continue to engage with the Israeli government on the amendments to the proposal that Hamas submitted earlier this week. We continue to work to try to finalize the text, try to get an agreement. And I will just say that any effort like this is incredibly difficult. This one has certainly been incredibly difficult, but we will continue to stay engaged to try to get a deal because we believe it's in the interests of all relevant parties.
Thank you.
So just to